To be frank, the Australian Grand Prix fell short of Ferrari's expectations. But what does the team principal expect from the next race in China? In today's video, we see the internal statements of Ferrari. We are going to see what is the balance of power between the top teams after the first race of the season, and finally we have to analyze the behavior of the SF25 in wet conditions. What didn't work? Before we start, please leave a like, and now let's look at everything in detail. Lando Norris won the first Grand Prix of the season, resisting the pressure from Verstappen. The McLaren package proved to be superior, while Red Bull seems to rely almost exclusively on the talent of the Dutch champion. The RB21 excels on the straight, but it's not up to the MCL39 in the rest of the circuit. But what is the only weak point of McLaren? It's the tight corners. For the rest, the MCL39 boasts the best stability, lateral load, and excellent aerodynamic efficiency. In China, a track that rewards these characteristics could be even more dominant. Mercedes, on the other hand, has shown great traction and interesting behavior on the straights, taking advantage of extreme wing flexions.
Front now.
It's now up to Norris and Piazza to show who will lead the team. The two have very different driving styles and personalities, both on and off the track. Verstappen tried to put them under pressure, but in the end, it was the Australian who made the most serious mistake. Consider that Russell and Leclerc finished 35 seconds behind in just 32 laps. The SF25 showed lower aerodynamic load than the competition and a tire management not up to par. And being the fourth force would be unacceptable for Maranello, but 2024 teaches that 6 races are not enough to define the hierarchies of the season. A year ago, McLaren appeared overshadowed by Ferrari. The SF25 is currently the most mysterious package in recent times. No one knew what to expect in Australia, no one knows what will happen in China. The first sprint of the year could increase the pressure. A Formula 1 car should be designed for full circuits like Shanghai, but the SF25 so far has shown everything but the necessary efficiency. What is Ferrari's real problem? Ferrari currently seems to elude understanding. The data indicates good speed on entry, but the car loses stability. The countermeasures adopted so far are not enough to handle the temperature and asphalt variables. Even the setup parameters like the ground clearance never seem to have been optimal. A worrying fact is that even with a perfect qualification, Ferrari would have only improved by 6/10 compared to 2024. McLaren and Mercedes, on the other hand, have gained 1.2 seconds, a clear sign that something didn't work. Now, the Maranello team has few races to prove that the SF25 is just immature and that the potential exists. If there are no concrete improvements, it will be inevitable to divert resources to 2026, quickly moving from 50% to 80-90% of the development of the new single-seater. A logical choice, but hard to accept for us fans and for the team. And Vasseur also commented on the poor race that Ferrari had in
Australia.
Objectively,
we have seen a Ferrari that was not able to perform in wet conditions nor in dry conditions. In qualifying, Ferrari struggled to match the pace of the top teams, particularly in the third sector where traction was an issue. The wet conditions also exposed the car's lack of aerodynamic load, resulting in excessive understeer. Despite the disappointing performance, team principal Frédéric Vasseur remained optimistic for the next race, citing the challenging mix of dry and wet conditions in different sectors as a contributing factor. Reference to the final stages when the rain made it difficult for the teams. At that point, it was a gamble. We as Red Bull chose to stay out while Mercedes and McLaren came back in. But I think Norris and Piastri did it more because they went off track than for strategic choice. However, we all said it, and even Vasseur himself admitted that in hindsight, Ferrari should have followed Verstappen and anticipated the pit stop. We were all surprised by the amount of water. We don't have rain sensors, so we rely on radar and instinct. Lewis Hamilton's debut with Ferrari was among the most discussed topics in the post-race briefing. Some radio exchanges between the 7-time champion and his new track engineer Riccardo Adami seemed frantic. It was their first race communication, Vasseur explained, downplaying the issue, stating they will improve over time. In such a complicated weekend, some difficulties were inevitable, but it's not a concern. On Hamilton's adaptation path, the team principal reiterated, "It won't take long. The weekend was complicated for other reasons. The race management was difficult and we made mistakes, but we learned a lot and we will do in China better." In fact, looking at the progress of the Grand Prix, Vasseur emphasized that the conditions in Melbourne do not reflect the values on the track. Looking at Friday and up to Q2, the picture was clearer. Just look at Verstappen, his times varied by a second per lap. When the tires overheat, performance drops sharply and needs to be managed carefully. On the next round in Shanghai, Vassar is clear we won't go on track with a specific goal like P1 or P1-2. The important thing is to maximize the work, and we didn't manage to do it in Australia. We also have to remember what happened in the last 4 races of 2024. Mercedes dominated in Las Vegas. We were strong in Austin and Mexico, and the gaps changed from weekend to weekend. Preparation is everything. If the car is not ready, the performance does not come. Ferrari is therefore preparing to turn the page. China will be a new test to understand the true potential of the SF25. Vasseur admitted they made a mistake by keeping dry tires on the track following Verstappen's strategy. It was a difficult situation to manage. But one thing is certain, we have seen an SF25 that still struggles at low temperatures. But what did the drivers say after the race? Leclerc had a good start, he immediately gained 2 positions and then threw away a possible top 5 with a head-tail just as the rain began to fall. Ferrari's strategy, already shaky, then relegated him out of the game, so much so that he ended up behind a Sauber. It was a tough race, with many aspects to improve, the Monegasque put it. From the outside, everything may seem simpler, but every situation has its nuances. We weren't the fastest, but with the variable conditions we could have scored more points. My mistake in turn 11 didn't cost me much thanks to the safety car, but the real problem was the delayed pit stop for the intermediates, which made us lose too many positions. And the clan openly admits that before discussing the team's decisions, the biggest error was my own. A 3rd or 4th place was possible, which would have changed our perspective. We need to work on managing strategies in such complex situations. China is not such a favorable track. We suffered last year, but we need to do better. This must only be the starting point. And if Leclerc had a day to forget, Hamilton's debut in Ferrari was certainly no better. The 7-time world champion finishes 10th, spending much of the race stuck behind Albon's Williams. Only the rain allowed him to gain some positions, but once again the Ferrari strategy penalized him. The call to the pits for intermediates came too late. It wasn't the start we wanted, but this race gives us food for thought. This is what Hamilton declared. Yes, I lost position in the first turn getting stuck behind Albon, and from there it was an uphill race. Adapting to a new car, a new power unit, a new steering wheel, and new radio communications is a huge challenge. I was hoping for a better result, but the rain complicated everything. The Briton emphasized the difficulty of finding the right balance. We took a risk with the strategy and gained positions, but then the delayed pit stop made us slip to the bottom of the top 10. The level shown today does not reflect our true potential. We need to analyze the data and improve for China. McLaren and Red Bull were very fast, so there's a lot of work to do, but I'm determined to give my all. After the Australian disaster, the Maranello team needs to react swiftly. The pull road suspension has already come under fire, but the truth is that the problems with the SF25 go far beyond. The choice to revolutionize 95% of the single-seater compared to the SF24, which was still a good base, now seems a gamble. The damage is done, one might say, but everything will depend on Ferrari's ability to find the right countermeasures. Shanghai will be an important test as it's a real track unlike Melbourne. You need to have a lot of aerodynamic load. In 2024, the Red One struggled, and the characteristics of the circuit apparently do not seem favorable. But the question is only one. Will Ferrari be able to reverse the trend, or will it already have to start looking at 2026? In my view, we should wait a few races before judging the SF25. First of all, because Melbourne is not a real track, it's a city circuit and the conditions were not favorable, so let's wait to judge a completely new single-seater like the SF25, and then after a few races we can say whether it's a winning project or not. The fact is that you first need to experiment with different setups on the car to prove whether a car is strong or not. But let's go and do a more detailed analysis of the race pace. In the first 14 laps, McLaren and Red Bull were running at similar paces with Piastri overtaking Verstappen, marking a change of scenario. From that moment, the Dutchman lost ground, stabilizing at about 9 seconds from the McLaren duo. While the battle at the top was heating up, Ferrari was a helpless spectator. Leclerc's SF25 accumulated over 30 seconds of delay in just 30 laps, showing a pace on average more than a second slower than the best. The real problem was not only a nervous behavior, but also the inability to lower the times. Hamilton's situation was worse, stuck behind Albon for half the race. The heavier aerodynamic configuration of the SF25 penalized the speed on the straights, making overtaking difficult without drag reduction system. In the end, the numbers are ruthless. Ferrari ran with an average pace almost 2 seconds slower than McLaren, certifying a disastrous weekend. The most interesting battle of the Ferrari race took place between its own drivers. After the safety car's exit on lap 52, Leclerc made the most of the restart, reducing the gap to Hamilton to 0.250 seconds thanks to better traction coming out of turn 14. This allowed him to latch onto the slipstream and gain 3.72 miles per hour on the straight, the advantage necessary to attempt the attack. The Monegasque chose an aggressive maneuver on the outside of turn 1, taking advantage of his higher top speed, and the telemetry data shows how Leclerc carried a good 7.45 miles per hour more speed than Hamilton, thanks to perfect management of the trail braking. In detail, Leclerc executed a decisive corner entry, starting the braking with a strong pressure on the pedal to transfer the aerodynamic load to the front. He then released the brake gradually and earlier than Hamilton, gaining speed in the middle of the turn. The risk was carrying too much speed on exit, with the possibility of running wide or worse, hitting his teammate. To avoid contact, Leclerc lightly touched the brakes after the initial release, correcting his trajectory and maintaining control of the car. On the other hand, Hamilton opted for a more cautious approach, not aggressively opposing Leclerc's attempt, and in turn 2, he lifted his foot by 60%, letting his teammate pass. A likely deliberate choice, a heated duel would have only worsened an already disappointing result for Ferrari. But Shanghai will be a different story, and the Australian Grand Prix has shown an SF25 in great difficulty. Now Maranello must respond quickly. Even Hamilton's attempts to adjust the use of the hybrid system, guided by Riccardo Adami, did not help to improve the situation of the English driver, who was stuck behind a Williams for most of the race. And what were the main differences between Ferrari and McLaren in Australia? The performance differences between the two teams were particularly evident in the most technical sector of the circuit. The MCL39 showed perfect balance, allowing Norris and Piastri to delay braking and maintain optimal traction out of the corner. On the other hand, the Ferrari suffered from excessive instability in the rear, with excessive roll that limited the tire footprint. This forced the drivers to manage acceleration conservatively, with a direct impact on lap times. Though Ferrari's performance was underwhelming, Kimi Antonelli's debut stood out as a highlight of the weekend. The young Mercedes driver impressed in the rain, climbing from 16th position to 4th, making an incredible last overtake on Albon in the rain. After a spin in the early stages, Antonelli kept his cool and managed his strategy perfectly, bringing home valuable points for the team. Leclerc put his mistake in the spin, but telemetry shows that he did nothing different from the previous lap. The real problem was the grip, which worsened as the weather conditions changed. And the Monegasque stated, "Without the spin, I could have finished 4th or even podium, but would anything really have changed?" What? The podium would certainly have scored more points, but it wouldn't have hidden the main problem. The Ferrari SF25 is 2 seconds per lap slower than the McLaren. And this is the real alarm bell. On the eve of the race, there was a rumor that Ferrari had sacrificed qualifying for an extreme wet setup in the hope of being competitive in rainy conditions, a theory that turned out to be completely unfounded. In modern Formula 1, there are no longer such drastic adjustments between dry and wet settings. Carlos Sainz had already explained this in 2024. The truth is that today there is no wet setup. You can modify the brake intakes for thermal management of the tires, but nothing more. The choice of a more loaded rear wing was a strategic decision, not an attempt to prepare the single-seater for the rain. Ferrari simply tried to stabilize the aerodynamic load, an approach already adopted last year. And so the theory of the wet setup crumbled as soon as the rain arrived. The SF25 lost even more ground compared to the dry, showing an even more unstable behavior compared to McLaren and Red Bull, who instead maintained solid performances without any special configuration. What advantages would the hypothetical wet setup have offered, considering it was 2 seconds per lap slower than McLaren, getting stuck behind a Williams with no chance of overtaking, finishing behind Stroll and collecting fewer points than a Sauber? All the teams knew about the incoming rain, yet only Ferrari ended up with an unmanageable car. McLaren and Red Bull didn't adopt any extreme setup, yet they were faster and more stable. That's why Ferrari needs to come back with concrete answers in Shanghai. The problem wasn't a wrong strategy or an unfortunate incident, but the SF25's foundation is crucial. The team must rapidly grasp how to unlock the car's full potential. Otherwise, 2025 risks turning into another season of regrets. China will already be a decisive test. Ferrari came out of the Melbourne Grand Prix with only 5 points, with even 6 McLaren among the 2 drivers, 27 Mercedes 25, and Red Bull 18 with only 1 driver. In summary, this trend must be reversed, and we'll see if it's possible in China. Vasseur is hopeful about this. Tell me your opinion on all the topics we covered in the video and on the first race of the season. I'm curious to read and respond to everyone. As always, I remind you to leave a like and to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss all the Formula 1 news and specifically Ferrari related news. I'll leave other related videos here from Rastaduto. See you in the next video.